أهلا وسهلا بكم في لقاء منتدى الثقافة لهذه الجمعة المصادف 9 من شهر تموز 2021. ونيابة عنكم وطبعا أرحب بالضيوف الكرام وأرحب بالمحاضرة الدكتورة سوزان ويلكس، وهي لأول مرة تشارك في نشاطات منتدى الثقافة في محاضرة مهمة عنونتها استشراف الماضي في بلاد ما بين النهرين من خلال الحاضر الإبداعي. So welcome Susan to our meeting of the Cultural Forum in UK, and we are pleased to have you today in this meeting and in this activity. تقول سوزان في هذه المحاضرة: سأشارككم حبي للأبداع والبهجة في الفن مع عرض لأعمالي الفنية التي تستوحي معانيها من تاريخ الفن العراقي القديم نفسه. لقد شغفت والحديث لسوزان منذ طفولتي بالأماكن السياحية التاريخية في العراق-أرض وادي الرافدين، فكانت رحلة تعلمي تزداد ألقاً بالاطلاع على تاريخ فنون ومنحوتات وأساطير الآشوريين والبابليين والأكديين والسومريين. كل ذلك أصبح عامل إلهام للوحاتي وتواصلها في نسق واحد تحت عنوان وادي الرافدين: الإلهام والرؤى. لقد كان تركيزي دائماً على العامل الإيجابي وفي عملي الإبداعي الفني، وكيف أن تاريخ وادي الرافدين كان الملهم لي وكان الملهم للعديد من الفنانين والفنانات حول العالم من الذين يعملون في فن التصميم. ولدت الفنانة سوزان ويلكس والدكتورة سوزان ويلكس في بغداد، ودرست في مدرسة المنصورة الأهلية، كما درست فن تصميم الغزل والنسيج في كلية الفنون بمدينة ليدز الإنجليزية. عملت معلمة ومحاضرة في التصميم وفي الدراسات الخاصة بالفن والنقد الفني، وفي عام 2001 حصلت على منحة دراسية من جامعة ليدز لدراسة الدكتوراه في الفنون الجميلة، وحصلت على هذه الشهادة عام 2005، حيث استمرت في عملها وبحوثها ودراساتها ومبادراتها في الفن وخدمة المجتمع، حتى أنها ألفت كتاباً بعنوان الفن وفهم الفن ومعناه. طبعاً هناك الكثير مما يمكن أن يقال في هذا المجال، ولكن أيضاً من المهم أن أشير إلى البايوغرافي لسوزان بالإنجليزية. المحاضرة ستكون بالإنجليزية أيضاً. Susan Wilkes, born in Jumhuriya Hospital in Baghdad and later attended Al-Mansour Private School. Her family moved to England in 1970s, and in 1979 she began a 4-year course in textile design at Leeds College of Art. Following successful completion of her studies, she then worked as a graphic designer and a freelance illustrator in industry before qualifying as a teacher and returning to educational environments as a lecturer in graphic design, visual studies, art and design, and critical studies at undergraduate level. For many years, Susan was busy with a full-time career in education, not only as a lecturer, but also as a student. And during this period, she completed feminist theory, MA feminist theory, history and criticism in the visual arts course at the University of Leeds. In 2001, she was awarded an Arts and Humanities Research Council scholarship to undertake a PhD in fine art practice. Susan completed her doctorate in 2005, and in the intervening years since that time, she has exhibited artworks, written and presented research papers, organized and facilitated a large-scale community arts project and worked upon a range of independent research, craft, and illustrative ventures. Susan recently completed writing an online book titled Art Without the Waffle, Understanding Art and Meaning. Ladies and gentlemen, we are welcoming Susan to our activity and to our lecture series. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. We're just enabling the screen sharing so that I can present the slide. So hello everybody, and thank you for accepting my talk titled Mesopotamia, Touching the Past Through the Creative Present into your Cultural Lectures programme. I really appreciate this opportunity to share my artwork and interests with you. I should mention that I have produced this presentation from the perspective of an illustrator who has an experiential connection to the subject, rather than from the standpoint of an academic with archaeological expertise on the topic. I'm certain that you will already have existing knowledge relating to Mesopotamia, and so I hope you won't mind, but at times I will include a little historical information just to provide some context to my talk. My personal experiential connection with Mesopotamia began in the 1960s. I was born in Baghdad to an Iraqi father and an English mother. My mum Sheila studied art in Leeds, and it was there where she met my father Mahdi, who had come to the UK in the 1950s to study. After they were married, my parents went to Iraq, but returned to England a year after in 1961. In 1967, we went back to Iraq, finally returning to the UK in 1970. I have loved colour and texture for as long as I can remember. My appreciation of surface pattern design was definitely stimulated by my childhood experiences of living in Iraq. Being surrounded by the strong, vibrant colours and the patterns in our home really inspired me. And Mum encouraged me and my sister Sarah to be creative. In this slide, you can see an image of one of our Bedouin rugs, and besides it, a painting that my mum did, showing my father lying on the rug. I have also used colours and motifs from this rug in my painting of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, who has been described variously as a warrior, a scholar, a lion hunter, and a librarian. Examples from his were displayed at the British Museum in 2018 in an exhibition titled I Am Ashurbanipal, King of the World, King of Assyria. The exhibition sought to highlight the importance of preserving Iraq's rich cultural heritage for future generations. We went to Mansour School in Baghdad, where our mum was a teacher, and she also worked as a graphic artist, designing logos such as these for the Central Bank of Iraq. The two designs on the left show an encircled Marduk, the hybrid dragon god who is depicted on the Ishtar Gate at Babylon, and behind him is a flame representing the Iraqi oil reserves. These designs were selected for use, surrounded this time by a border constructed of wedge shapes to represent cuneiform writing, was selected, and it was used by the bank for several decades. Ruling empires and civilizations in Mesopotamia included the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Neo-Babylonians, and the Neo-Assyrians and the Persians. The Sumerians had invented cuneiform, one of the earliest forms of writing, around 3500 BC. You press wedge-shaped marks into soft clay tablets. This clay tablet fragment is from the ruins of Babylon. It bears the names and titles of King Babylon between 604 and 562 BCE. Clay and pottery has long and very deep roots in Iraq and was used for all manner of purposes, including building houses, constructing domestic ovens and utensils, making tonga vases and pots, which I used to love painting as a child, creating sculptures, and for producing writing tablets and seals. In this painting, you can see how I've used cuneiform lettering as a decorative motif beneath these characters who are described as being protective spirits, guarding against evil forces. They're sourced from a wall panel from the North Palace at Nineveh that I had seen in the Ashurbanipal exhibition. There are many different versions of cuneiform letter forms online, covering vast periods of time and different styles. These ones simply spell out Mesopotamia. Living under the intense blue skies that framed the reds, yellows, and oranges of the sun, and seeing the beautiful tiles that embellished the surfaces of the mosques, imbued my creative senses with delight and wonder. And my appreciation of the decorative arts were further enhanced in 1968, when, together with my mum and my dad, who was working for the United Nations at the time, we toured Iraq, visiting many ancient Mesopotamian sites, including Babylon, Nimrud, Samarra, Hatra, Ur, and Nineveh, and I became fascinated by the magnificent sculptures and artifacts that we saw on our travels. Ancient Mesopotamia was situated between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, in an area that's often referred to as the Fertile Crescent, because the agricultural surplus it produced and the populations it supported led to the first large city-states. Spanning modern-day Iraq and Kuwait, together with parts of Turkey, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and Egypt, this region is also called Cradle of Civilization. And this is because, of course, rise to important innovations in astronomy, medicine, maths, systems, and brewing. The world's oldest wheel and kiln were discovered in Mesopotamia. And then in the mid-19th and 20th centuries, France and the United States launched many archaeological expeditions to seek out relics from ancient Mesopotamia. What has been described by some as looting to adorn museums in the West later resulted in the creation of government-linked departments and more collaborative archaeological endeavours. In the photograph in the centre of this slide, you can see the archaeologist Leonard Woolley excavating a royal cemetery at Ur. He sometimes referred to these royal cemeteries as death pits because of people of high rank that were buried and servants who had been obliged to consume poison and to commit suicide so that they could accompany their master or mistress to the next life. Among from the royal cemetery at Ur were these wonderful artifacts. A little sculpture, and today this is titled Ram Caught in a Thicket, that is made from lapis lazuli and gold. And in the centre, there's a magnificent headdress said to have belonged to Queen Pu Abbey, who is also sometimes known as the High Priestess Shubad. No one knows who she was for certain, but what is certain is that she was of very high rank. Lapis lazuli and carnelian, and it's absolutely stunning. Her cemetery was one that Leonard Woolley had called a death pit because so many of her attendants had died with her. To the right of the headdress is a magnificent bull's head which decorates the lyre, a musical instrument similar to a harp. While the Iraq Museum in Baghdad quite rightly received the lion's share of treasures excavated from Ur, apparently Ur means city in Akkadian, many finds were also distributed among major museums around the world. In recent times, artifacts and treasures from ancient Iraq have flooded the black market. In 2003, the Iraq Museum in Baghdad was pillaged and looters stole more than 15,000 precious objects. The eminent Iraqi archaeologist Lamia El-Gailani talks about this devastating act of destruction. The Museum of Lost Objects. She specialised in cylinder seals, and she talked about how her favourite seal, the harvest seal, has never been recovered. When we returned to the UK in 1970, I brought my love for art, craft and colour with me. I didn't especially think about my sights, but as with all of life's experiences, they became woven into the fabric of my subjectivity. Although I hadn't lived in Iraq for very long, my time there was indelibly marked upon me. I went on to study textiles and later taught art and design to undergraduates. And then, needing to research my subject deeper, I went on and did an M. In 2001, I was awarded an Arts and Humanities Research Scholarship to do a PhD in fine art practice. And it was during the year of my doctorate that my memories of Mesopotamia re-emerged. The clay fragment from Babylon that I showed you earlier became the creative catalyst that prompted me to make a short experimental film about my childhood experiences of living in Iraq. After completing my PhD, I was busy writing a book about art when I devised an illustrative technique that involved working with inks, watercolour and tube liner paints onto balsa wood panels. Remembering the incredible Mesopotamian artifacts that I had been introduced to as a child, I started to think about how I might be able to render versions of these using this technique. Initially, I made 4 Mesopotamian-inspired paintings as a gift for my parents in memory of travels, and then later I further extended the series. I'm going to run through some slides of these now. Each painting is founded on an actual Mesopotamian relief sculpture, an artifact, epic, myth, or pre-Islamic legend. For example, Anta, shown in the top left, was a pre-Islamic Arab knight and poet, famous for his courage and adventurous life. Abla. And to the right of Anta is a hybrid creature called a Lamassu, which is an Assyrian protective deity. Lamassu have a human head and the winged body of a bull or lion, and they flank entrances to Mesopotamian cities and buildings. In the bottom left is the snake dragon god Marduk, a mythological creature who is depicted on the Ishtar Gate, which was the main entrance into the city of Babylon. And to the right of Marduk are 2 eagle-headed jinni. These are protective genie figures that also occur in similar form in Greek mythology, such as the griffin and chimera. A number of mythological characters tend to cross-reference geographically with other cultures. In this painting, I have depicted a lion from the processional way leading into the city of Babylon, together with an auroch, a young bull, from the Ishtar Gate. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the first great epic of world literature, is based upon a legendary king who ruled the Mesopotamian city of Uruk. I have depicted Gilgamesh in this painting with his beloved friend and former foe, the hybrid man-beast Enkidu. This painting is of two goats rearing up a tree, and it's based upon a beautiful little shell mosaic which is inlaid into bitumen. In reality, the mosaic is only a few centimeters tall, and it's currently on display in the top floor Mesopotamian Gallery in the British Museum, where the smaller treasures are displayed. The Mesopotamian Gallery on the lower floor houses the large freestanding sculptures and relief wall panels. It is thought that the Assyrian people would stand on a hill well out of harm's way to watch the royal lion hunt, and here I depicted an Assyrian lion mid-chase. The Assyrian kings liked to plant gardens that evoked a paradise on earth. They filled their gardens, orchards and game parks with plants and animals collected from across the empire, and they decorated walls with images of idyllic garden settings. In creating these paradises, the Assyrian kings demonstrated their ability to bring abundance and harmony to the world. The decorative elements that I include in my paintings, such as the border shown along the bottom of this painting, are sourced from original Mesopotamian decorative motifs and designs. I really appreciate the historical, aesthetic, and archaeological provenance of Mesopotamian antiquities, but when I make my paintings, my focus is not on academic purism. For example, this image shows a clay relief known as the Queen of the Night. It portrays a Mesopotamian goddess, probably Ishtar, who was first known as Inanna and worshipped in Sumer. No one knows who she was for sure. In this painting, I've depicted her as Ishtar from the Epic of Gilgamesh, in which she asks her father to call down the bull of heaven, represented by the star constellation Taurus, to kill Gilgamesh for refusing her advances. Her symbol, the planet Venus, is shown as an 8-pointed star because it takes 8 Earth years to return to the same place in the sky, and the Ishtar Gate, which was dedicated to the goddess, was the 8th gate to the inner city of Babylon. On her head, she wears the horned headdress of divinity, although purely for decorative purposes, I have adorned it with flowers from the headdress of Queen Puabi. The original sculptures and objects had a place in historical contexts that are entirely different of the museum environments that now house them, or indeed to contemporary creative projects such as my own. The relief sculptures lining the walls of the North Palace at Nineveh had a social as well as a decorative purpose, serving as a means to display wealth and secure power, and to ensure that subjects both feared and respected their rulers. Scenes might depict royal hunting grounds, the spoils of war, or protective spirits to guard the king. In this painting, the protective spirit is said to be taking a liver sponge from the sacred tree. In his left hand, he holds a water carrier containing water from where the two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, meet, which he will then sprinkle on King Ashurbanipal to protect him from evil forces. More recent research, however, suggests that genie spirit figures such as these are taking a pine cone from the sacred tree and performing a kind of pollination fertility ritual associated with a divine power to give life and to bring an abundant harvest. Readings of these works alter over time and are not fixed. And then in the relief panel shown top right, You can see scribes tallying up the number of severed heads lying on the floor following a successful military campaign. I don't like to rework such images. I prefer to produce work that is based on sacred or domestic subject matter rather than bombastic or brutal content. My own interest lies with aesthetics and creativity, and I find the fantastical hybrid creatures depicted in these relief sculptures stunning, and the artifacts from the royal tombs beautiful. Hybrid beings feature repeatedly in Mesopotamian art. It was a means of distinguishing between the cities and domesticated life on earth and the mysterious sacred world beyond. These characters, a musician and a singer, are shown performing for the king, who is sitting with his scribes and officials in the top panel of the wonderful Standard of Awe. The standard-shaped box that was discovered in a royal cemetery at Awe at the base and narrower at the top. Its use is not known. Part of a musical instrument, some kind of sound box. Its two longest sides depict contrasting scenes of war and leisure. On the opposite side of the standard, the king is again shown in the top panel, this time surrounded by his soldiers and chariots. If one side of the standard shows the ruler being entertained and running a thriving economy, the other side shows the army that he needed to protect it. And this painting, also based on a character from the Standard of Awe, shows a man bringing animals to the palace as tribute. Although the colours, surfaces, of the artisans differ beyond comparison between the past and present day, I feel that what connects us with the past and our ancestors are shared emotions such as love, loss, fear, meaning, pain, desire, and hope, together with an awareness of mortality, those things that constitute what it is to be alive and human. Many Assyrian artisans used to work collaboratively in creating the relief sculptures. Some would first draw the designs onto stone, and then masons would have the inscriptions. This has revealed that mineral-based pigments such as hematite red, ochre, and later Egyptian blue, a synthetic pigment that derives its colour from copper, these were used to create colour palettes. Fashions and colours changed over time, but the colours I use today differ vastly from those used in ancient times. I do not strive for any sense of authentic accuracy in this regard. For me, as an individual, working on a series of illustrations that were inspired by these artisans, it's about touching the past, about connecting with it through the creative present. The process of making my paintings is quite lengthy. I use balsa wood as a base because the wooden grain has a lovely texture with a natural luster that reflects light and colour. I cut panels of balsa wood into sections, which I glue together onto board to give me a strong surface. The wood is so absorbent that I'm unable to work onto it directly with paints as these bleed into the grain, and so I outline the design first using three-dimensional true paints, a similar process to that of silk fabric painting. This results in the figures having a raised edge, which I feel is in keeping with the relief sculptures that inspired these works. I don't know what colours I will use for each image beforehand. I tend to work intuitively. I can feel when or if I need to change things. The colours I use are my interpretation of the colours of the land. When I think of Iraq, I think of colourful Bedouin rugs, blue or yellow skies, sandstone, dust, and turquoise tiles. I apply a whole range of paints and inks to build up the illustration in layers, and when the paint is dry, I work on top of it using soft chalk pastels and three-dimensional tube paints. This painting is of these little worshipping votive figures. They're referred to as votive figures because it's thought that in a similar manner to that in which people might leave a candle with their prayers in a church, that similarly in ancient times, an owner would have a little figure made, not necessarily representative of themselves, and they would place it in the temple together with their prayers, and they would leave it to continue praying in their absence. These figures are very iconic with their beautiful, huge staring eyes, and the hands seem to be of great significance too. Nobody knows for certain why the eyes are depicted so disproportionately large, but several theories abound. For example, that the eyes are large as they are windows to the soul, or perhaps because the figures need to remain alert to prayer, or maybe they're open in awe and wonder at the sacred. Personally, I feel it's important that we ourselves remain open to the many different possibilities and interpretations. I am but one of a long line of artists inspired by this wonderful heritage and history and the amazing creative output it generated. For example, Giacometti, Henry Moore, and Barbara Hepworth were similarly inspired by these stunning artifacts. Henry Moore wrote about this in a book review titled Mesopotamian Art. In this paper, he stresses how Mesopotamian art covers vast periods of time and styles of representation. He himself favoured the earlier, more minimal forms of the Sumerian freestanding sculptures, rather than the later Babylonian and Assyrian reliefs, which he considers to be overly decorative and fussy. And I'm sure you'll be familiar with the work of the contemporary American Jewish Iraqi artist Michael Rakovitz, who had an exhibition, part of an ongoing project, titled The Invisible Enemy Should Not Exist, showing at the Whitechapel Gallery in the summer of 2019, and who had his sculptured lamassu made from riveted date syrup tins installed on the fourth plinth in Trafalgar Square. Although Michael's representation of a lamassu has 4 legs, many lamassu sculptures have 5 legs in actuality. This is because from a side perspective, the lamassu appears to be in stride, but from the front view, it firmly stands guard. Lamia El-Gailani taught in the podcast that I mentioned earlier about how she had found the faint lines of a game, similar to dominoes, that is still played today by the people of Mosul, and these were carved into the base of the lamassu, she presumed by bored Assyrian guards. Her observations bring life and humanity to the solid rigidity of these magnificent sculptures. While Michael is making important, critical, and conceptual comments through his work in relation to cultural appropriation and the political, economic, military, and humanitarian conditions in the region, I'm quite open in saying that my illustrative artworks have not been formed through such critiques. Everything in this world can be framed by or interpreted through a critical lens, but this is not my own particular focus for this project. All art is biographical. It is the embodied product of the person doing, facilitating, making, or creating the work. And while my illustrative artworks do not deny their critical connections with the world, my focus in this series is simply to raise awareness of the and cultural heritage of others. Creativity as a form of meaningful human expression can connect people to the world, own personal lived experiences, and I believe that such approaches can bring supplementary value of significance in and of themselves. It is important, however, that I should acknowledge that these artifacts are politicized because so many have been appropriated by museums and collectors, or perhaps by those like the Islamic State group who want to destroy or abuse them, as they are seen as being symbolic of a pre-Islamic polytheistic heritage. Thankfully, there is now a greater awareness of the need for ethically responsible practices among museums and a collective international desire to preserve and protect artifacts, together with digital and virtual advancements that support and enable the wider sharing of world heritage. Replicas of the 5-metre-high sculptures of Lamassu that originally adorned the throne room of King Ashurnasirpal II at Nimrud have been reconstructed in a collaborative project between the British Museum, the National Museum of Antiquities in the Netherlands, the Spanish and Iraqi governments, and Harvard and Princeton in the US. These were recently installed at the University of Mosul. I was listening to the BBC Radio 4 series Curating the Future, and Paul Collins, the curator of Near Eastern exhibits at the Ashmolean Museum, was discussing the reconstructed Lamassu. He said they're not replacing something that has been taken because the Northwest Palace where they once stood no longer exists, and many of the ruined treasures that existed in that region have since been destroyed by IS. Paul had brought together volunteers from the diaspora to work with him on curating the exhibits, and Mustafa Bacha, a Syrian Kurd volunteer curator, was asked what he thought about the items on display. He said, "It's incredible that an institution like the Ashmolean has kept the artifacts safe and preserved. This makes me so happy. But on the other hand, I'm really sad that IS tried to destroy our heritage." The Penn Museum is also seeking to be more culturally representative of the artifacts it houses and to offer primary perspectives by hiring refugees as tour guides for their Near Eastern exhibits. In addition to sharing historical information about the artifacts on display, the guides combine personal stories to interpret objects from their own countries of origin. But there is a sense of ambivalence about museums holding on to these treasures, because although they save the artifacts from destruction, something of the country is inevitably destroyed when they're taken out of context, and this undeniably takes something from the people of the land. Acquisition or appropriation may be deemed a necessary act in certain circumstances, but to me it seems appropriate that people and nations might also honour, raise awareness of, and celebrate world heritage by reinterpreting culture creatively. While creative representations cannot compare with and should not be judged in relation to the originals, it is lovely to see these tiled Babylonian-style palms, which are based on reconstructions from King Nebuchadnezzar's palace, decorating the Klosterstrasse U-Bahn station in Berlin. Or perhaps consider the work of the wonderful Canadian musician Peter Pringle, who sings the Epic of Gilgamesh in the Sumerian language, and you can find Peter Pringle's work on YouTube. Ancient Mesopotamia continues to inspire all manner of creative practices around the world, as you can see in the slide, from fashion to furniture design. My own approach in making this Mesopotamian-inspired series is to seek to contribute in a very small way by representing, sharing, and circulating this wonderful heritage in wider context as an artist and an illustrator, much as I am doing here today. For example, my illustrated paintings have been reproduced as a series of cards and prints. My aim is simply this: to extend and share my love for decoration and colour and the wonders of Iraqi historical antiquity together with other people. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you
Ahmed.
so much. Thank you for your presentation, for the lecture. What a wonderful work and art and design and messages from your lecture. I remember very well the BBC a few months ago, and it's still actually available on iPlayer, ran a series of programs for about 1 hour, in total about 4 hours, about Persian culture. And it was edited, it was a wonderful program, edited and narrated by Samira Ahmed, one of the journalists in the BBC. I think the BBC need to pay attention to your work, Susan, and maybe any future program about Iraqi culture and Mesopotamian culture and all the activities in that region need to definitely pay attention to your work as an example of the effect of art and art illustration and creative representation, which is really very important to convey the messages to the world. So thank you so much for your work. I'm sure thank you. Our colleagues and our guests who are joining us today, maybe they have comments or questions, and I will start with Salam. Dr. Salam. Your microphone, please.
Thank you so much, Amr and Susan. Fantastic work, fantastic work. I'm so happy that I attended this lecture. While you were talking, I was looking at your mothers and fathers' faces and see how proud they are. They are dear friends of mine. And I haven't met you before, but I know you through your dad and mom. And this is a fantastic work you did. Beautiful illustrations. In fact, you brought a third and even perhaps a fourth dimension to the ancient work of Mesopotamia, of the vibrant colors, the beautiful illustrations, the attention to detail, which are fantastic. Are these in your book?
No, I currently no, they're not. My book's more focused on the subject of art.
Yeah, I would love to have a book of yours. If you put all these pictures, I'll buy 10 copies of it, because I would love to.
Thank you.
I would love to give copies to friends and family to see the fantastic work you have done. This is brilliant work, and I'm so happy that I'm here. And I can see your parents are so proud of what you have done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Salam.
Thank you, Salam.
Any questions or any comments? I noticed, yes, Avi, if you can open your mic, please.
Yes.
Open your mic. It's still, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's great. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry about that. First of all, Susie, thank you very, very, very much for an excellent talk. Absolutely brilliant, first class. I'm impressed with your work. I'm impressed with the fact that you are preserving all these treasures, because it is for eternity, for the future. Unfortunately, you mentioned that a lot of it had been damaged, had been vandalized. I hope that you get all the funds and necessary support. Now, one simple question. Do you know if the UNESCO are involved in any restoration work? The United Nations, you know, UNESCO, yes?
Yes, I was listening to the podcast, The Museum of Lost Objects, and so I'll just, please could I refer to my notes rather than, so for example, there's an Iraqi archaeologist called Layla Saleh, and she's head of the Nineveh Antiquities section in the Iraq State Board of Antiquities and Heritage. And her job is to go to heritage sites and to assess the damage and to oversee fixes. So there is work going on, but whether UNESCO are involved, I couldn't tell you.
I think they should be made involved. I'm sure they, because of the importance of the project. Sorry, I can't.
This heritage is made important, that this wonderful heritage is preserved and that people are made aware of it. It's a wonderful heritage, and it inspires so much.
Of course.
In the country, and also it's positive, and that's the thing that I connect with in it. It's a positive history in terms of creativity and art, and it's inspired a lot of Western art history that people probably don't connect with. They don't make the connection.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. If there is any question or comment, Susan, I just have one question about the art of Mesopotamia and the art for the ancient Egypt. Any similarities, because the culture is almost the same, although I think Mesopotamian art is more complicated than the art in ancient Egypt. What do you think?
Well, Mesopotamian art covers so many thousands of years. It's not one thing, but there are many parallels and civilizations that were developing at the same time along the Indus Valley, along the Nile. I noticed so many similarities in the documentaries about Persian art as well, and yet there are differences. For example, the Lamassu, in the Persian versions of Lamassu, the wings are curved upwards. There are subtle differences, but so many parallels and similarities between the different cultures. They cross-reference in many ways.
Sure. There is a question from Najla Khalil, and she's asking you, Susan, about, do you paint on silk or canvas?
Oh, I'm holding here, this is balsa wood. It's a very light wood, and I paint onto balsa wood. It's very reflective, the colours. I don't paint onto silk or canvas. I like the balsa wood because it reminds me of, I suppose, of sacred paintings that are done onto wood. And I like the grain, it gives it a nice texture. And balsa wood, it's a weed tree that's grown in South America. It's a weed tree native to South America. It's ethically sourced because it grows so readily. It grows tall and straight, and that's why I use panels. I have to cut them because I can't get pieces that are large enough for a single piece of work. And so I have to join panels of this wood together. So that's the surface that I choose to work on for these illustrations.
Right. Thank you for this clarification. I wanted to take your opinion about the rebuilding of Mosul nowadays and the huge project from UNESCO in funding the big mosque, the Nuri Mosque. Mosul, we call it Jami' al-Hadba, Mosul al-Hadba. And there was a project and there was a competition as well between different designers and architects to design a Nuri mosque in Mosul in Iraq. And I am not sure whether you know the design, the outcome of this competition. There was a design from Egyptian company with a group of architects, and they won the competition 2 months ago, something like that. But there was an objection from Iraqi artists, as they were saying that this is not a true representation of the culture of Iraq and Mesopotamia at that time. So what do you think? It's a big project. If we take these projects into consideration and the rebuilding of these sites in Iraq, cultural sites and historical sites, the sites from history, what we should do to make it as much as possible, true representation of the original? What do you think?
I don't know about this project, but I'm making notes so that I can look up and research these things. So it's really good to be made aware of it. My daughter's just showing me an image of it now on her iPhone. Yeah. I do think, though, that it's important to keep projects such as this, national projects for Iraq, with Iraqi architects and people. I mean, you only have to be aware of Zaha Hadid to know the wonderful skills that already exist in Iraq. So that's something that I would, just a personal response.
That's a great, thank you for that. And your creative representation is basically based on the history of Mesopotamian art and the art of Mesopotamia. Do you think that there is any similar experience from artists throughout the Arab world or Muslim worlds which represent creatively their own culture, similar to you representing creatively the Mesopotamian culture?
Well, probably the most famous in the West currently would be Michael Rakowitz and his work, his large ongoing project, The Invisible Enemy Should Not Exist, where he's reconstructing but not replicating the objects that were stolen and looted from the Baghdad Museum. So I'm most familiar with Michael's work, Michael Rakowitz's work.
Right.
There are many young Iraqi artists working here in Leeds as well, who are having exhibitions and exhibiting as well in academic conferences. They're very active. It really has expanded over recent years. Art practice, fine art practice especially, within the West.
That's really very good, Susan. Do you have any connection then with sources inside Iraq, Susan?
I don't have any direct connection with sources inside Iraq. No, sadly, I don't.
No,
So I've just been taking up this project and working away on it privately. In fact, it's not really that long that I've been doing these things, this particular series of illustrations. So I presented my work. I went to London, to Kingston upon Thames, to meet with a wonderful group of Iraqi women at the El Hana group, and presented my work to the El Hana group. And it was run by Hannah and Sam Salman. And it was just the most wonderful event. And I met so many wonderful Iraqi women. And then I was about to do a presentation for the Friends of Leeds Museum, and COVID happened. So everything just became very insular after that. Hopefully we will see whether I can develop some connections in that regard. Now, I'd really like to.
That's great. There are, as you know, there are few groups, artists and exhibitors in London, Iraqi in origin. And in fact, in a few weeks' time, there is a big bazaar is going on after 19th of July, after opening the lockdown and the rest of it. So it will be very nice, of course, for your work to be there. Maybe beginning of next year, for example, something like that, is to engage and make sure that your work will be there in every exhibition with Iraqi,
It would
fellow
be,
Iraqi artist. Yes.
It really would be wonderful to have an opportunity like that. And the reason being that when I show you the work on screen, it looks very flat and two-dimensional. But in reality, there's a lot of texture. And, well, I don't know if you can tell from me holding up this little,
So
there's
it's
texture.
3D, is it a 3D?
There's dimension to it.
Right.
Yes, it's much more three-dimensional. This is just showing how I build up the illustration in layers.
Yeah.
But in reality, I think the work has it's stronger to see it in actuality rather than as a two-dimensional representation.
That's great.
So, you know, it would be really wonderful to have an opportunity like that.
Sure. Dr. Ali Qaddu wanted to ask maybe.
Well, thank you, Dr. Amr, for this great lecture. And thank you very much, Dr. Willicks, for this colorful presentation. My question is basically, when did you actually started, you know, painting this Iraqi Mesopotamian culture, old culture? I mean, is it something recent or is that from your start? And how many pieces roughly you have produced, and where do you exhibit your pieces usually? And the last question, which is important probably to me, what's the reaction of the people, especially like British people, to this art, and what's the comment about it? Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. What a wonderful question. Well, I'll break that down into responding to each point. So I've made 20 of these paintings so far. They mostly measure, I've made other ones as gifts for people, but on the whole, there's 20 paintings in the series to date. They're mostly 30 by 30 centimeters, but when I went to do the talk in London, I did sell a painting that was asked to be larger. So I did a few at 50 by 40 centimeters. And so that's how many there are. When did I start making them? Well, I initially made the 4 for my parents some time ago, but I didn't extend the series until probably 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. No, it will be 3 years ago because it was pre-COVID and when I went to London. So it's not been that long, and then COVID happened. So I haven't exhibited widely at all. I did go to Kingston, as I mentioned, and then I was due to present the work to the Friends of Leeds Museums in March, just before COVID happened, literally a week before lockdown in the UK. So there I might have found out how British people would respond to the work, but unfortunately that didn't happen because of the pandemic. So hopefully, if things are running up, because Dr. May Sam in London wanted me to go down and do a stall at a bazaar in London celebrating crafts from Iraq. And again, that couldn't happen. But hopefully, if the situation is going to improve, then I can resume that talk that I was going to give to the Friends of Leeds Museum, and then I will find out how British people respond to the work and be able to answer questions in response. I do point out, I did stress that I'm not producing these as a series of fine art works. My PhD was in fine art practice, and that was very much focused on academia, on psychoanalysis, politics. It was critical, more on the academic outside, and I like to differentiate between different forms of art. I think it's a mistake to judge different art forms in relation to each other because they're very different. It gets confusing for people. What's fine art? What's an illustration, graphic? Can a graphic be fine art? And all these questions start to arise. So I do make it really clear, as I think came across hopefully in my talk, that my emphasis in these works is purely on colour, decoration, and the positive connections of creativity between thousands of years, really, different artisans. The work from all these thousands of years ago is very alive for me today through my own illustrations of these works.
Okay, thank you so much. There is a question, I think, and I will go back to Dr. Salam. Question from Yusra Tahir Jerjis, and then Dr. Salam. Yusra, to open the mic.
Okay, good afternoon, sir. I'm from Mosul.
You are welcome.
I'm sorry that I attend the meeting late, so I missed the earliest speech. But I want to ask Mrs. I don't know her name because it is
Susan?
English.
You want to ask Susan? Yes.
Susan, yes, Susan. About did she ever visit Mosul, or is there a plan to visit Mosul?
Good question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. I did child. I was only 8 years old, and I'm 61 now, so it was a long time ago. But yes, I did, and I have very strong memories of Iraq, that in terms of the landscape and colours, and that's really what the work connects with, rather than any lucid memories of Mosul. But I remember touring Iraq with my parents, and it was just such a significant time for me in terms of soaking up the atmosphere and the landscape, and just being there with them at that time in the 60s. But thank you, yes.
Thank you.
Whether I have any plans to go anywhere at the moment is a bit tricky, due to well, family health reasons and the current pandemic, but it would be just a wonderful, amazing thing to do. Actually, in the 1980s, I was going to return. I was at art college, and I was going to return to Iraq. I had all my injections, and I went to London to get my visa, and then the Iraq-Iran war broke out, and so I didn't go. But it would be the most amazing thing to do.
Sure. Thank you for that. Salam, please.
Yeah, thank you again. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. Susan, I just want to reassure you that your artwork looked to me on the PC screen as three-dimensional, and even more than that, because you could see that they are projecting on the surface, and the colors were amazing. My question to you is about your satisfaction to yourself of the work you have done. What do you feel? I mean, you start with a piece of wood, a flat piece of wood, and then you create something that to me looks like it speaks to you. It's so beautiful, colorful, and three-dimensional. How do you feel after finishing this wonderful piece of work?
Well, thank you so much for your kind comments. I really, really deeply appreciate them. I love doing this work. I love colour. I really do. It's a part of me, and I love laying colours, juxtaposing colours, and working with layers of colour. They sing me. I love them. I feel them, and I just adore colour. And I really feel that the Bedouin rugs, the textiles, the tiles, I just adore them. They're wonderful. What a beautiful heritage and history, really. Beautiful.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's very good of you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Right. Okay. The last word with you, Susan, please, if you want to say anything at the end of the activity.
Well, besides shukran, thank you so much to everybody. It's been a truly wonderful experience and opportunity, and I'm deeply grateful to everybody who has participated and listened and given me your precious time. I'm very grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and we are really pleased to have you.
Thank you.
And we hope you
Thank
can
you very
join
much.
us again.
Great lecture.
Yes.
Absolutely great
lecture.
Thank you, Amr. It's a wonderful lecture, I must say.
Thank you.
Fantastic lecture.
The good news, it's recorded and it's going to be soon on YouTube as well, where everybody have the opportunity to see it and to study it as well. Thank you so much.
Many thanks. All the best.
Ending.
Thank you.
All the best. Bye-bye.
All the best.
Thank you.
All the best.